Hello, hello. My name is Jim Reese. I am the director of the Great Plains Writers Tour here at Mount Marty University. And I'm happy to introduce John T. Price. He's the author of 4 creative nonfiction books, Not Just Any Land, A Personal and Literary Journey into the American Grasslands, Man Killed by Pheasant, and Other Kinships, Daddy Longlegs, The Natural Education of a Father, All Is Leave, Essays in Transformation, and his latest book, Goethe's Oak, A Holocaust Story. He is also the editor of the Tallgrass Prairie Reader, the first nature writing anthology dedicated to North America's most endangered ecosystem. Born and raised in Fort Dodge, Iowa, he earned his BA in religion, MFA in nonfiction writing, and a PhD in English at the University of Iowa. A recipient of an NEA fellowship and other recognitions, his work has appeared in numerous journals, magazines, and anthologies, including Orion, Terrain, Fourth Genre, and the Best Spiritual Writing Series. He is the Regents Foundation Distinguished Professor at the University of Nebraska in Omaha, where he directs the English Department's Creative Nonfiction Writing Program. And he is a faculty member in the Goldenstein Center for Human Rights. He lives with his family in the Rose Hills of Western Iowa. Please help me welcome one of my best teachers that I had in the master's program at the University of Nebraska in Omaha, John T. Price.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Jim, and thanks to all of you who have made it possible for me to come here. It's such an honor and privilege to be invited. Thank you, students, for taking time out of your busy semester to be here. Even if you were forced to be here, I appreciate you being here to listen to me today. And I am going to today talk about and share with you the story of an ancient and legendary tree that stood on the grounds of Buchenwald concentration camp. It was a tree that made a difference in the lives of many of the prisoners there, and which continues to hold meaning, or should, for those of us living today. I first learned about this remarkable tree during a 2015 visit to the Buchenwald Memorial near Weimar, Germany. There, beside tributes to the concentration camp's human victims, I unexpectedly encountered a large tree stump upon which visitors had left hundreds of small stones, a tradition, as many of you know, in Jewish culture intended to honor the souls of the dead. Nearby, a small plaque read in German, Goethe's Oak. As a nature writer and as someone whose life has been profoundly affected by reading, studying, and teaching Holocaust memoirs, and by listening to survivors, I wanted to know more about this tree. What special meaning did it hold for Buchenwald's prisoners and for others that earned it such caring and remembrance? But before I continue with the story of this tree, because I'm speaking here at Mount Marty, a university that values, promotes the necessity of the humanities, it is important that I acknowledge that I would never have been standing there on the grounds of Buchenwald in front of that tree stump, let alone written about this tree, without a general education humanities class I was forced to take as a sophomore at the University of Iowa in 1985. The class was called Quest for Human Destiny, and tailor-made to make people in the sciences like I was confused about my major, because it was such an awesome class. And it was taught by a professor of religion, Jay Holsting, also a rabbi. At the time, I was studying pre-medicine, taking mostly science classes with the intention of becoming a pediatrician. In this class, we were assigned Primo Levi's 1947 memoir, Survival in Auschwitz. This book, written by a Jewish-Italian chemist imprisoned at the infamous camp, demonstrated to me, for the first time really, the universal ethical power of literature and remembrance. It also taught me, for deeply personal reasons, I'm going to talk about a little bit later in Jim's class, that medicine isn't the only healing art. Literature can play that role as well. By the time I graduated, to make a long story short, I found myself embracing the possibility of being a writer and teaching the literature of witness, the nonfiction literature of witness. One scene in particular from Primo Levi's memoir haunted me for reasons I didn't entirely understand at the time. It occurs as the prisoners at Auschwitz are being assembled on the grounds for morning roll call after a brutal Polish winter. This is a quote. Today, the sun rose bright and clear for the first time from the horizon of mud. It is a Polish sun, cold, white, and distant, and only warms the skin. But when it dissolved, the last mists, a murmur ran through our colorless numbers, and when even I felt its lukewarmth through my clothes, I understood how men can worship the sun. Now I can look back and see, in this deceptively simple moment in a humanities class, the seed of what would eventually become one of my guiding missions as a writer, to bear witness to the many ways nature is intertwined with the human spirit. And I mention this memory, this class, because many of you are in such humanities classes now, and you don't know sometimes when you're in them the kind of power, influence that it will have over you as you move through your life. But trust me, they will. And here was that feeling, again, 30 years later, standing before the preserved stump of an ancient oak tree on the grounds of Buchenwald concentration camp memorial. So what was this tree's story? I'd never heard of it. I'd read a lot of Holocaust literature, taught Holocaust literature, never heard it mentioned. Goethe's oak was a centuries-old English oak that once stood on the north slope of the Ettersberg, a forested Hausberg, or home mountain, rising over 1,600 feet above Weimar, Germany's famed city of music, art, and literature. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, Friedrich von Schiller, and Johann Sebastian Bach were among the luminaries who once resided there. English oaks are native to Northern Europe, and some have lived more than 1,000 years. Indeed, for generations, this massive oak was well known to those walking the ancient trails of the Ettersberg, who rested in its shade and enjoyed the beautiful views. When the Nazis cleared the forest in 1937 to build Buchenwald, they spared the oak because of its great size and legendary status, a living symbol of what they considered to be Germany's superior strength and culture. Aryan strength and culture. Among many of the prisoners, however, the tree took on quite a different meaning. Many had undoubtedly heard the story told for generations in Weimar and well beyond, that in 1776, the renowned Weimar poet and scientist Johann Wolfgang von Goethe sat beneath the same oak's branches to write his famous poem titled Wanderer's Night Song, about his unrequited love for Charlotte von Stein, an older married woman whom he used to meet there. The rough, handwritten manuscript is signed, quote, at the slope of the Ettersberg on 12th February, 76. In this book, I have included that imagined moment of Goethe writing this poem beneath the oak's branches, along with the poignant verses of the poem itself, as famously translated by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Some prisoners would have associated this poem as well with the melodic strains of Franz Schubert, who set it to music in 1815. That's how famous this poem was. Goethe's oak was the lone tree on the main grounds of Buchenwald, where numerous Jewish, Sinti and Roma, POW, and LGBTQ peoples, along with religious and political resistors, were imprisoned from 1937 to 1945. This includes one of my own heroes, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the Lutheran theologian who was part of the failed attempt to assassinate Hitler. He was kept there before being hung, executed in a nearby camp. There were many children and teenagers in the camp, including a young Elie Wiesel, author of the book Night, which some of you will be familiar with, and his father, who died there in 1945, and he talks about that in the book. More than 56,000 people perished at Buchenwald. In the midst of their extreme suffering, Goethe's oak, as stated in the account of the tree at Buchenwald Memorial, embodied for some prisoners, quote, a legend, a bit of unharmed nature, a reminiscence of the world outside the camp. We can only imagine the details of these reminiscences, but it seems likely they would have included past scenes with family and friends, maybe walks in natural beauty, perhaps reminiscences as well, amplified by Goethe's poem of romantic love and longing in people who they cared about that they might never see again. For writer Ernst Weichert, imprisoned at Buchenwald in 1938, the tree and its poetic associations were a reminder of the higher principles that human beings might still be faithful to. In his autobiographical novel, Forest of the Dead, published in 1945, he wrote, "It took only a minute to reach the oak, which was said to have once cast its shadow over Goethe and Charlotte von Stein. It stood next to a camp road, the only place from which one could now see far out into the countryside. The moon was hanging above the wooded hills, and the last sound of camp were gradually subsiding. He looked down for a little while, as much alone as if he were the last man on earth. He tried to recollect all of the verses he had once known by him who perhaps had stood upon this very spot some 150 years before, Goethe. Nothing at all was lost of that great life. And even if at 50 years they had fettered him to a galley, nothing would have been lost. Noble, helpful, and good." This is a quote from another Goethe poem. "Oh no, not even that was lost, as long as but a single man could say it to himself and try to preserve it and carry it to his last hour." Tragically, Goethe's oak was also at times a site of torture. Victims were bound to it for extended periods. It thus became, for some, a symbol of Nazi brutality. Indeed, the forest just outside the camp was referred to by the prisoners as the singing forest, because people were tortured there as well, and the sounds of their anguish reached the camp. Their, quote, singing. But whatever the meaning this individual prisoners gave the oak, the tree itself undeniably shared in their suffering, a fact that on its own might have evoked compassion and identification among the prisoners. Conditions on the grounds, including the compression of the oak's roots and the lack of other plant life to help the soil retain water and reduce exposure, soon did the tree irreparable harm. Possibly as early as 1942, the oak was in the advanced stages of dying, and there remain no known photos of it in full foliage. There is, however, a small drawing of the tree with leaves labeled thick oak on a German camp map from 1941 to 1942, and I include that image here at the beginning of the book. And you can see the tree marked prominently here on that camp map. During an Allied bombing raid in 1944 of a nearby munitions factory, Goethe's oak was severely damaged by an errant bomb, and it is said, burned through the night. Although there were casualties at the destroyed munition factories where many prisoners were forced to labor, there were no deaths from the accidental bombing of the camp itself. The oak alone was hit. Is it possible that the tree's diminished yet still substantial branches and trunk prevented others from being injured or killed by the explosion? What is certain is that Goethe's oak became yet another victim of Nazi brutality at Buchenwald. What remained of the tree's decimated body was felled by the order of camp commanders in the spring of 1945, shortly before the American military liberated the camp on April 4th of that year. The oak nevertheless lives on in the memories of those survivors and their drawings and engravings, which are on display in the Buchenwald Memorial. This includes the image of a human face, a death mask, which writer Bruno Apatz secretly carved into a piece of wood from the actual Goethe's oak while he was imprisoned there in the camp in 1944. The Last Face, as this work of art is called, this carving, is a powerful work of commemoration, directly linking the suffering and dignity of one body, one species, with another. The tree is remembered as well by those visiting Buchenwald Memorial, who have reverently placed stones on its preserved stump. I was one of those visitors. In this book, I tell the story of the life of Goethe's oak, from acorn to its time in the camp. But here's the unusual and unexpected thing about this story, at least for me. I tell it from the perspective of the tree. Now, writing from the perspective of any non-human being involves taking significant liberties, and as an environmental writer, I am well aware of the dangers of anthropomorphizing, which is imposing human feelings and desires and wishes onto non-human beings, which has caused immense destruction in the world of our natural environments. In this case, however, with this tree, I felt the tree deserved a voice and a chance to witness. And I tried to approach that creative and ethical challenge with care and with respect. Part of that effort included learning more about recent scientific inquiries into the social lives of trees, and here's where the old science geek in me was brought back in this writing of this book. When I was in college, here I was in the sciences over here. I was taking these humanities courses over here. I thought, there's no way these two things can be brought together, right? They were on separate parts of the campus, separate faculty, sometimes separate colleges. Writing this book and some of my other nature writing has demonstrated that is not the case. That what science teaches, what the humanities teaches, are deeply intertwined and necessary, I think, to be a fully realized and ethical human being in this world. So I felt it was important that I do more research about tree communication and potentially tree sentience. At the forefront of that research is Suzanne Simard, professor of ecology at the University of British Columbia and author of Finding the Mother Tree, Discovering the Wisdom of the Forest. If any of you read the novel The Overstory, she's a major character in there, or a version of her in there. Professor Simard and others have determined that far from being isolated, trees are connected to one another through vast underground networks of symbiotic fungi known as mycorrhizae. These intertwining fungal rivers, which I refer to in the story as living words, supply nutrients and water between trees, but also communicate warnings that trigger innate biological defenses. Although, like some humans, there are tree species that send out unfriendly, even toxic chemicals to discourage encroachment on their resources. Those trees are portrayed in this book as, quote, those who did not wish to connect, to share. We probably know a few of those people in our life. Most trees feed and protect one another, often, here's a key point, regardless of species. This is especially evident when older trees are dying, when they pass along what remains of their essential nutrients, as well as a kind of biological wisdom through these mycorrhizal networks to help vulnerable saplings survive, even those that aren't direct offspring. It is their final gift to future generations. As Professor Simard writes, when mother trees, the majestic hubs at the center of forest communication, protection, and sentience, die, they pass their wisdom to their kind, generation after generation, sharing the knowledge of what helps and what harms, who is friend or foe, and how to adapt and survive in an ever-changing landscape. It's what all parents do. What Professor Simard refers to here as a mother tree is often the largest and the oldest tree in a particular area of forest, a tree that plays an essential role in that ecosystem's extensive web of interdependency. Although I refer to the mother tree in this narrative as the female one with a capital O, oaks are not biologically gendered. Each has both male and female flowers. This ancient being, like any good parent or guardian, is most capable of nurturing and protecting newer generations of trees, as well as countless other forms of life, among them a diversity of insects, birds, and both small and large mammals. It is quite literally a tree of life. In his book, The Nature of Oaks, The Rich Ecology of Our Most Essential Native Trees, Douglas Tallamy, professor of entomology and wildlife biology at the University of Delaware, refers to oaks as top life support trees and states, "No other tree genus supports so much life." And foresters are actually now recognizing the importance of these mother trees in restoring areas of forests that have been cut and harvested. When those older trees are removed, even if they plant new trees and they're growing back, they're less healthy than they would be if these mother trees, these ancient trees, aren't there to communicate and help them along the way. This research informed many of the characteristics I attribute to Goethe's oak, likely itself a mother tree. After all, it was over 400 years old, including sensitivity to physical interactions with humans and other creatures, although it is unclear in what ways a tree might perceive the presence of a human being, through physical touch or chemical signals, such as sweat or breath or tears. Such awareness is a very real possibility, and there's so many fascinating discoveries being made now about trees and what they're able to sense. There's some evidence that plants will grow towards the sound of running water. There are others where they sense the presence of insect wings and will reveal their flowers or sweeten their flowers in ways that will attract those insects. Less certain, however, is how long and what form remnants of mycorrhizal fungi that once connected a mother tree to her offspring remain after her death. This is kind of an important issue in the book. The mother tree, this tree's mother tree, plays an important role. Her death and his connection, this tree's connection to her lingering presence. But it's unclear if that's scientifically accurate. Do trees retain some other kind of lasting biological memory of a parent? And here's what liberty I take as a creative nonfiction writer. Whatever science determines, as someone who recently lost a parent, my father passed away this summer, and the book is dedicated to him, I choose to believe that such memory does exist within trees, as it does within other sentient beings, as it does within me, and maybe you. Although the main character of my story is not human, the meaning of its life was enriched by the many emotions and memories that humans attached to it during its years in the camp. Enriched as well by Goethe's love poem, a testament to the ways that art has the power to deepen, sometimes unintentionally, our connection to nature and to each other, reminding us of our humanity and sustaining us during extremely difficult times. This was a lesson I learned 30 years before in that humanities class as a young college student. Finally, in writing this book, I seek to honor in my own ways the millions of people who suffered and died at Buchenwald and elsewhere during the Holocaust. I also wish to acknowledge the countless and largely untold losses sustained by non-human beings. Suffering does not recognize boundaries among the living during wartime, if it ever does. We are fortunate that Holocaust survivors like Primo Levi gave witness to their experiences and to those of others in the hope that they might never be repeated. Unfortunately, other life forms did not leave us such words of witness, at least not in any language we can readily understand. As Elie Wiesel observed in 2009, while revisiting Buchenwald, where he had been imprisoned as a teenager, quote, "If these trees could talk." In seeking to give voice to Goethe's oak, I have only my own limited knowledge, language, and imagination to rely upon. I have tried nonetheless to honor the spirit of this being who lessened, even for a moment or two, perhaps beyond any conscious awareness, as nature so often does, the loneliness and suffering of so many. May we be inspired to do the same. I'm going to read a few sections from the book itself in that voice of the tree that I created here. But before I do so, I wanted to share with you, and I'm not sure you will be able to see this, but in the book I include one of the only known photographs of the tree. This is after it was already in the advanced stages of dying, so this would have been around 1944, before that errant bombing burned it. But you can see it's lost branches here, but an English oak would be very widespread. It would have a huge, huge number of branches, and they're all gnarly like this, and very distinct. And you can see why it stood out on those trails when people were walking there. And this is the stump, as it is now, at the camp, with all those memorial stones on it. And what's interesting, too, about the preservation of this stump is that, following World War II, Weimar became part of East Germany under the control of Russia, right? And there were many Russian POWs kept at this camp and executed at this camp. And so the connection to this tree, the desire to preserve it, its memory, crossed those national boundaries and cultural boundaries. It is now, of course, back in control of Germany. I'm going to read a few panels here from the early years of the tree's life. I'll read a middle section, which includes that poem by Goethe, and then I'll finish up with the time in the camp and the very end of the book. I can talk more about the form at some point, maybe during the conversation, but this is what it looks like. Each chapter, each page, it has a short block of prose. Over here, the voice of the tree, and over here, what is meant to look like natural parchment, and a minimalist image of an acorn or a leaf. And the book designer was a little unsure about this when the book designer proposed it, because it is so minimalist here. But she said, let me do this. Let me position these acorns, these leaves, in a way that I hope reflects the emotions on that right side of the page. And I think what she did was beautiful and incredibly successful, and I've heard a lot about this. It's also a meditative space to think about what's being discussed here and told, and the emotions. And this is the very beginning. Life begins with a stirring inside, an unfamiliar longing to grow, to change, to become whatever you are meant to be in the time and place you are given. For me, that place was an ancient forest on a mountain called Ettersberg. My home there, in this beginning, was an elemental darkness, but I sensed the light beyond. I sensed, too, a mysterious giving. From where it flowed, I did not know, only that it was there, and it was good, and it was not me, not yet. I felt the sky before I ever knew it, the light, the warmth, the immensity I was born to reach. But first and always, I had to reach within and down, toward the source of giving. Others were there. I was not alone. They surrounded me, providing, helping, guiding, especially she who created me, the One. I felt her presence most of all. She told me, in her own way, that this place in the dark was my first and my final home, that it would always hold and sustain me here among the many of our kind. You must never let this go. Never forget. But I was young and impatient to grow. I broke through the surface. The light, overwhelming at first, became gentle warmth. The stirring of life continued. New parts of me were born. Each drop of light settled like dew on my first leaves, and I drank it in. I wanted more, but others stood between me and the greater light, the sun. I did not understand that they were protecting me from the high, cold winds, from the heat, striving to give me what the sun provides. I wanted only what they had. The One was still there in the depths below, the sky above. Her giving was stronger because I was part of her. She would help me reach the sky, the clouds. She would never leave me. I sensed this promise from her. With each new season, I was becoming what I was meant to be. Some would call me an oak, but we are not what we are called. We are not the words others use to name us. We are ourselves, never fully known, even to us. Like the sky above, the depths below, there is always more to become. We may think we know what we were before, in the beginning, but can we really know? When did this beingness begin? Perhaps in a long ago moment, rooted among the stars. Another kind of being, not of the forest, visited us more often. Each walked lightly above our roots, but they could also bring thunder and suffering. We knew when they had taken one of our own. We felt each one fall, its pain, its final giving. But some of these beings sat beneath my branches and did not take. The warmth of their bodies against mine, though I was armored against fire, could still be felt. Their songs heard, and it was good, especially on cool nights under the moonlight when they lay beside me alone or with others before the vastness of the Ettersberg. During such a night, near spring awakening, one of these beings lingered and leaned against me. The air was still cold, my leaves not yet born. Even so, I sheltered him from the north wind. I drank the water of his tears. Upon a dry leaf, he made his own living words, speaking them aloud to the darkness. Thou that from the heavens art, every pain and sorrow stillest, and the doubly wretched heart, doubly with refreshment fillest, I am weary with contending. Why this rapture and unrest? Peace descending. Come, come into my breast. It was less than a moment in my long life, this visit, this wanderer's night song. It did not feel different, just the warmth of another being sitting or sleeping or dying beneath my limbs. So many, but like a seed, it would become something more. There came a day when one of these beings was bound to my body as others had been. The binding cut deep into my flesh, sharpening the thirst, the pain. The body against mine shook, bent in ways it should not be bent. Tears fell onto my exposed roots, and I drank them in. They became part of me. After nightfall, one of these beings returned, alone, touching my wounds from the endless binding. The moon hung above the great open. A breeze caressed my leaves. The beings slid deeper into the shadow of my body, trembling, pressing their warmth close to me. I felt their breath upon my bark, heard their whispered song, their living words. Thou that from the heavens art, every pain and sorrow stillest. And then it seemed, without choosing, there came from inside me another kind of gifting, different from any I had known, an invisible sustenance, a comfort, a promise, you are not alone. Across a few seasons more, the beings kept drawing near for shade, for warmth, and for something else. They sang aloud the living words in different voices, the doubly wretched heart, I am weary with contending. Some words were not sung aloud, though they were just as alive. Silent echoes of what makes a spirit breathe or mourn. Tears unforced, born as naturally as rain is born. Why this rapture and unrest? Echoes of what we are or should be, a gentle touch, a promise, peace descending. Of those once loved, now beyond reach, the longing to be near them again, one with them again, bodies entwined in joy, beneath this same jeweled light, breezes dancing in the leaves, countless night songs. Come, ah, come into my breast. All this and more I was giving over to them without trying, stirring what remains of the life within, even in this place of death. This is the ending. Spring arrived, but not for me. No flowers, no leaves, no sky. I was far below the surface when I was awakened in the dark, the cold, alone, afraid. Then from the depths, like a hidden wellspring, came a murmur, very faint, as when life first stirred within me. Could it be? It was only a trickle of her living words, but it was enough for me to know the one. She had never left me. She had kept her promise, and so had I, becoming like her, what I was meant to become, doing what I was meant to do in the given place and time. Now at last, I returned to where she and the others had always been, even in sleep, the forest, home. Do you think this is all there is? No, there is always more to become. This time for me, inside those who had drawn near in this place of death and like autumn leaves, made their way beyond the fence. They would not let me disappear entirely. The being who had lifted their eyes, drank their tears, helped them live. You must never let go, never forget, peace descending. Upon my remnant body, they have placed stones that are like acorns, seeds. From them, something beautiful has grown and is still becoming. Here and elsewhere, inside all those who hold to the earth, yet reach for the light. All who shelter and comfort others, softening their scars. All who defy the merciless, the cruel, challenging names and the so-called inevitable. All who suffer that even a few might be saved. All who love far into the depths, no loss, yet love again and again. All who remember and become the living words, the promise kept, the one. For us, such giving is not always a choice. Sometimes it is just being what we are meant to be. Leaves among the clouds, roots among the stars. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Do we have some time for questions?
About 5 or 10 minutes.
Okay.
I want to start out
Sure.
just because I love your definition of it. Can you tell everybody what your definition is of creative nonfiction?
Yeah, that's the simple answer is that it's applying creative writing techniques that you would find in fiction classes, poetry classes, other creative writing classes, to non-fictional subjects and experiences. So, in other words, I don't see much of a difference between creative nonfiction at the level of technique between the creative nonfiction and fiction and poetry. We still develop characters, scenes, right, images that carry many meanings, etc. The difference is the relationship between you and the material, and what you hope will be the relationship between the material and the reader. You are not hiding behind a character. You are claiming these experiences as your own, right? You are putting yourself out there as the source of these experiences, thoughts, and so forth, and beliefs. And equally important, you don't want it to be read as fiction. You want it to be read as nonfiction, because readers bring a different kind of expectation to that work if it's labeled nonfiction. And also, the kind of work you want it to do in the world. When people say there's no difference between creative nonfiction and other, fiction, I say, well, tell that to Primo Levi. Tell that to Frederick Douglass, right? the American slave, right, who wrote about his experiences. He did not want his experiences read as fiction. He wanted them to be read as literature of witness. So it's that ethical component, and there's all sorts of other dimensions, right? Like you're writing about real people, you're writing about, people that could talk back, that might be interviewed, etc. Those are the kinds of decisions that fiction writers don't face sometimes, right? It can cause you to take stuff away. It can cause you to do stuff, make changes at the sentence level. All those things because you're very aware of the immediate impact that your writing and your art will have on real people, right, living today and maybe those who were in the past. So that's a long explanation, but I will just say, too, that it's a huge umbrella term. It includes personal essays, nature writing. These are all classes we teach in my program: food writing, travel writing, spiritual nonfiction, which is a class I teach. And I love that about it. I love that it is so diverse, right? And it's interdisciplinary by nature. People come to create nonfiction, to write it from all kinds of disciplines, in the sciences, the humanities, and elsewhere, and all are welcome. That's the beautiful thing about creative nonfiction. I think its openness, its diversity, right, in the way it pushes back and defies efforts to try to contain it, or like a frog on a dissection table or something like that, right? It's a long answer to your question, Jim, but I hope that makes some sense.
Thank you.
Yes?
A lot of the scientific research that was done about trees that you inquired about, were those things that you were able to organize and put into your book?
Yeah, that was, that's a great question, and I'll be honest, I'm not sure I would have felt comfortable writing this book without that science. I'm trying to find actually a reference to a couple books that I would recommend, but it was just starting to come out when I was writing this. It took me 10 years to write. This book, it can be read aloud in less than 20 minutes, and it took me 10 years to write this because of these issues, trying to find my way in, not just aesthetically and technique-wise, but just ethically, right? And this science from Suzanne Simard and others that was emerging at the time, and there's so much more that's been discovered since then, made it possible, I thought, to try to create a realistic character, a voice for this tree, based not just in my imagination and human history, but in science. So, there actually wasn't much to read at that point in time, at least that I couldn't find initially, but I certainly immersed myself in what I could find. Now, I would recommend a book if some of you are interested in subject matter. It came out last year. My book was already a press, so it was, I felt, I could have really used this book, The Light Eaters by Zoe Salinger. Zoe Schlanger. It is also about the communication between trees and all this research, and also about this idea of tree consciousness and the debate over consciousness, how to define it, intelligence, how do we define that, right, in plants and in trees. It's a beautiful work of narrative science. She's a journalist at the New York Times, and I would highly recommend it if you wanted to do more reading in this area. Great question, thank you. Any favorite trees out there? Do you have some trees in your life you care about? That's one of the reasons I also wrote this book, is to get, hopefully, people who read it thinking about trees that they love and why they matter to them and how those trees give to you. Right? Yes, sorry.
We had a special family rowan tree
Oh.
everybody put in our house, and that tree got chopped down. We were moved to the ground, and it kept coming back.
Yeah.
Better than the time before.
Yeah. That's the beauty. Trees are so resilient and courageous in their own ways, right? But I think we really feel that connection sometimes, unfortunately, when we lose the tree, right? I always assumed that some of these trees that were in my life would be there forever, right? And then they got cut down, and then I felt it. I felt the missing, I guess it's grief, right? For some of us, these trees are kinds of friends and relatives, loved ones that have been in the family for many, many generations. We're fortunate to have several of those trees in our yard right now, including the 300-year-old bur oak. to me, it's a sacred thing, a sacred being in that yard, and I'm just so grateful to be in the presence of this magnificent creature. Yes?
I think there's also a lot of ritual involved around trees. People planting trees in honor of maybe a new baby.
Oh, yeah.
Celebrating a new life. People planting trees to celebrate someone who's passed on. They're creating some more life.
Oh, yeah. Trees are at the center of so many spiritual traditions through time, right? Including Judeo-Christian tradition, right? And certainly also northern indigenous pagan cultures, right? Human beings emerged out of a tree in Norse mythology. But that's a really, really important point. And I'll just mention, too, that if you doubt the significance of the symbolism of a tree as related to this particular historical event in place, a number of years ago, I believe it was 10 trees that were planted at Buchenwald in memorial of those killed there were vandalized and cut down. They were targeted as a symbol of those people and those losses. And around here, you'll sometimes find those memorial trees, shoots that have been taken from those trees at the camps and planted here and elsewhere and grown as a living memorial to that loss, and to get us to remember it now, so it doesn't happen again.
Let's give John another round of applause.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.